Let's begin this morning in Alaska, where preparations are underway for that high-stakes meeting between President Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin happening tomorrow. The White House just confirmed there will be a joint press conference after the meeting, but President Trump appears to be tempering expectations, suggesting that the real results will only come when Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky is also at the negotiating table.
If the first one goes okay, we'll have a quick second one. I would like to do it almost immediately, and we'll have a quick second meeting between President Putin and President Zelensky and myself, if they'd like to have me there. And that would be a meeting where maybe it could be absolutely work. But the first meeting will not work that out.
CBS News Chief White House correspondent Nancy Cordes is joining us live from Anchorage, Alaska right now. So Nancy, it was sort of a curious statement by the president. I mean, presumably, if he wanted Zelensky at this meeting, why not just have invited him to this very first one? Why make it about two?
Well, the White House says it's because the president wants to feel out Vladimir Putin first, get a sense of whether Putin is really serious about negotiations. But the concern among many Europeans is that Putin is still refusing to sit down with Zelensky, someone who he has always argued is an illegitimate leader of Ukraine, which is a baseless allegation, but nonetheless, if true, would indicate that Putin still doesn't take Ukraine's claim to its territorial sovereignty seriously and maybe isn't that serious about ending this war. And so that's why European leaders were so concerned as this meeting was coming together, bent President Trump's ear yesterday in a video call and urged him to talk to Putin about a ceasefire first and foremost, and not talk to Putin about some of these secondary issues like a final negotiated settlement that might involve territory changing hands. They say the very first thing that needs to be decided, especially if Ukraine itself is not going to be in the room, is just whether Russia is open to a ceasefire, something that the Americans and the Ukrainians have been on board for months.
The president is also warning, Nancy, as you know, about severe consequences if Putin does not concede to a peace deal. Any indication of what some of those severe consequences could be?
He didn't elaborate, but we can assume that he meant more sanctions, more secondary tariffs on countries that purchase Russian oil, perhaps. The problem is that President Trump has made these threats before. Sometimes he follows through, sometimes he doesn't. So the question is, how much do those threats really rattle the Russian president? I did talk to one expert yesterday who said that part of the reason that Putin is probably pushing for this meeting now is that he is a little worried about what he's been hearing from President Trump lately. Trump has been much more critical of Putin and much more willing to impose tariffs on countries that buy energy from Russia. And she was arguing that that's probably why suddenly you had Putin proposing this meeting with Trump that is now taking place tomorrow.
And Nancy, before I let you go, you recall, of course, back in 2018 during that last Russia-U.S. summit where President Trump and Vladimir Putin met alone in a room without any other reporters present. What kind of access is the White House press corps being offered this time around?
So this time around, what we're hearing from the Kremlin this morning is that you will see a meeting like that again, where it's just President Trump, President Putin, and their interpreters, and no one else. Then the meeting will open up, and their advisors will be involved, as is more typical for these types of situations. And then what the Russians said and what the White House has now confirmed via the White House press secretary is that there's going to be a joint press conference, Trump and Putin, after the meeting wraps up, which will be a really rare opportunity, Vlad, for Western journalists to ask Putin about his 3-year invasion of Ukraine. And so it'll be very fascinating to hear what he has to say about that.
Yeah, really looking forward to that, Nancy. Thank you very much for the update. Nancy Cordes reporting live from Anchorage, Alaska this morning. Nancy, we appreciate it. All right, ahead of that meeting with Putin, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has been holding talks with British Prime Minister Keir Starmer in London this morning. For more on this, I want to bring in CBS News foreign correspondent Ramy Inocencio. He is joining me from the UK to tell me more about this meeting. So what transpired this morning, Ramy?
Hey, Vlad. Yeah, well, Number 10 issued a readout of that meeting, and they said that there is, quote, a viable chance to make progress as long as Putin here takes action to prove that he is serious about peace. We'll know that over the next day or so. But ultimately, this meeting between these two leaders here in London really appeared to be a kind of final show of friendship and solidarity between the UK and Ukraine as that clock ticks down to the summit. We saw Prime Minister Keir Starmer hug Vladimir Zelensky just so tightly there when he arrived at 10 Downing Street. There you see it. They also had a talk in the garden. And I want to raise this up because there were sunflowers on the table, and the sunflower to some represents loyalty, but significantly, this is also Ukraine's national flower. They could have chosen any flower. They decided that it would be the sunflower there. And then when Zelensky left after about an hour, Starmer also walked him to his car. That sounds normal, but that's actually a break also in a protocol. Zelensky, after that, said that their meeting was productive, that they talked about security guarantees and support programs for Ukraine's army. And just as Mr. Zelensky left, his X account posted a statement saying, even boasting, I suppose, that they had secured a new pledge of $1.5 billion in which NATO would be able to buy U.S. weapons and that send those weapons to Ukraine.
All right. And Ramy, ahead of that one-on-one between Trump and Putin, what's been happening on the battlefield with regards to Russia and Ukraine?
Yeah, the war still rages on, but what we're seeing right now is that Ukrainian troops have apparently stabilized the part of the battlefield we talked about yesterday, actually, in an area of eastern Ukraine where we had seen Russian forces make this push by several miles westward further into Ukraine. But the most compelling images right now coming out today are not happening in Ukraine, but they're happening in Russia. We're seeing Ukrainian drone attacks there. Two videos out now show drones hitting over the border into Russia. This one is Rostov-on-Don in the southeast over Ukraine's border. And then there is another drone attack to the north in Belgorod. All in all, we're seeing that at least 16 people have been injured in those attacks. You see that one in Belgorod on a car there. Meantime, there's a little bit of happiness, switching gears, in Zelensky's other post on social. He said that more than 80 Ukrainians were brought home. This is about another prisoner swap happening with Russia. These were both military personnel and civilians. He said they were held as far back as 2014. But beyond this, he said there'll be more swaps in the future. And then, of course, tomorrow, even more importantly, more crucially, that summit between Trump and Putin in Alaska is what we all, of course, are looking forward to.
All right. Ramy Inocencio for us in London. Thank you, Ramy.